Hi, Cass. This is our lecture on FRIA, or the Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act of 2010. So this lapsed into law without the signature of the president back in 2010. So in BDO, Unibank versus International Copra Export Corporation, you'll see there the legislative history of the FRIA. So this has repealed our old insolvency laws. The policy behind this law is to encourage debtors and their creditors to collectively and realistically resolve and adjust their competing claims and property rights. So this makes available to an insolvent debtor two options in order to answer for the claims against it, either through rehabilitation or liquidation. So when rehabilitation of that insolvent debtor is no longer feasible, then it will be subject to liquidation already as regulated by the Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act, or the FRIA. So the persons who are benefited by this FRIA are financially distressed persons, either individuals or corporations, including partnerships. So it is the first time in our insolvency law that individuals can now avail of rehabilitation and liquidation proceedings and suspension of payments. But take note, however, that with respect to individuals, they can only avail of either suspension of payments or liquidation. Rehabilitation will pertain to a juridical debtor. So proceedings in the FRIA can either be voluntary, it is initiated by the debtor, or it can be involuntary when it is initiated by the creditors. So these are the operative facts that need to happen in order for insolvency proceedings to take place. There is a creditor with a claim against a debtor, and the debtor is established to be insolvent, and the debtor will then undergo either rehabilitation or liquidation. So those operative facts will require you to know, okay, what claim that a creditor must possess as against a debtor. So you need to know what claim is. So claim is defined in the FRIA, in the law itself. So it is defined as all claims or demands of whatever nature or character against the debtor or its property. Okay, whether for money or otherwise, liquidated or unliquidated, fixed or contingent, matured or unmatured, disputed or undisputed. So the definition of a claim that a creditor possesses against a debtor is very broad. It is a catch-all provision. Okay, but it has its limits. Okay, not all claims are included. So you need to know what are those claims that cannot be covered by insolvency proceedings. So can a rehabilitation court consider the claims that a debtor has against its insurers? So the debtor has procured an insurance policy and is making a claim against its insurers in the same rehabilitation proceedings. So is that covered by the definition of claim in the insolvency law? So in the case of Steel Corporation versus MAPFRE Insular Insurance Corporation, the claim of the debtor is not covered by the rehabilitation proceedings. The rehabilitation courts only have limited jurisdiction. Excuse me. Another important term to understand is insolvency. So there is insolvency when the general financial condition of a debtor makes him generally unable to pay his or her liabilities as they fall due in the ordinary course of business, or when the debtor's liabilities is greater than his or her assets. So in the 2019 bar, okay, you are asked what is the concept of insolvency under the FRIA. Then we also need to know the definition of rehabilitation. So in the FRIA, it refers to the restoration of the debtor to a condition of successful operation and solvency. So if it is shown that the continuance of operation is economically feasible and its creditors can recover by way of present value of payments projected in the rehabilitation plan, or more, that the creditors can recover more if the debtor continues as a going concern than what the creditors can recover if the debtor is immediately liquidated. So you need to memorize the definition of rehabilitation, because this is one of the issues that is resolved by the court, whether or not the rehabilitation plan, okay, submitted to the court is in fact compliant with the definition of rehabilitation in the FRIA. So case law also provides us a definition of rehabilitation. You'll see it in a lot of cases. So the key phrase to learn is that rehabilitation contemplates a continuance of corporate life and activities in an effort to restore and reinstate the corporation to its former position of successful operation and solvency. Liquidation, another important definition to learn. This is the winding up or settling with creditors and debtors. So it is the winding up of a corporation so that assets are distributed to those entitled to receive them. It is the process of reducing assets to cash, discharging liabilities, and dividing surplus or loss. So when to rehabilitate and when to liquidate. So if rehabilitation is no longer economically feasible, then the only path is liquidation. So rehabilitation must be denied to corporations whose insolvency is irreversible. Okay? And the purpose of the proceedings, if the insolvency is irreversible, must be solely to enforce the payment of liabilities. So if a corporation only filed a petition for rehabilitation in order to delay payment to its rightful creditors, then there is no other choice but to deny the petition for rehabilitation and instead for the court to order liquidation. So there are several proceedings, okay, governed by the PREA. There's the court supervised rehabilitation. Then there are two out of courts rehabilitation, the pre-negotiated rehabilitation and the out of court restructuring agreements or rehabilitation plans, or the OCRA. Then we also have proceedings for suspension of payments available to individual debtors. And we have voluntary and involuntary liquidation. So the courts which have jurisdiction over insolvency proceedings are the special commercial courts as designated by the Supreme Court. So previously, it was the Securities and Exchange Commission, which had jurisdiction over rehabilitation and liquidation until it was transferred to the courts by virtue of law. So the SEC still retains, okay, the jurisdiction over corporate dissolution or liquidation, but not due to insolvency. So the main distinction between the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the courts when there is corporate liquidation is that the proceedings with the SEC do not produce the effect of suspending or staying the claims of creditors, unlike the proceedings in court, which will suspend all claims against the insolvent debtor. So the proceedings before the court, okay, is in rem, summary, and non-adversarial. It is in rem because all creditors and other interested persons are subject to the jurisdiction and eventually the judgment of the court when there is publication of the petition. And it is summary because once the jurisdiction of the court is established and once there is publication, then the court is duty bound to resolve the petition summarily, okay, without need of going through the rigors of a regular trial. It is non-adversarial because it is a petition addressed to the court to approve the rehabilitation of a corporation. So it is up to the court to decide whether or not to grant the petition. The petition is not addressed to an opponent, okay, or to adverse litigants. And cost of suit are not awarded in rehabilitation proceedings. Okay, this is made clear in the case of Express Investments versus Bayan Telecommunications. So the proceedings will not adjudicate opposing claims, but its aim is to restore the debtor to a position of successful operation and solvency. So when we are rehabilitating, okay, the debtor, then we want the debtor to be restored to a viable condition. So there is no settlement yet of any debts because the assets left that remains with the debtor will be used in order to implement the rehabilitation plan. So there will be no adjudication of claims in rehabilitation proceedings. So the Supreme Court has already promulgated rules of procedure. For rehabilitation, we have AM 12-12-11-SC, or the 2013 Financial Rehabilitation Rules of Procedure, the FRRP. For liquidation and suspension of payments, we have the 2015 Financial Liquidation and Suspension of Payments Rules of Procedure for Insolvent Debtors, or the FLSP. So prior to the 2013 and 2015 rules, the Supreme Court promulgated what we call the interim and the 2008 rules. So what is the effect of the 2013 and 2015 rules to those proceedings filed during the effectivity of the previous rules? So in the case of Allied Banking Corporation, the court held that the FRRP 2013 can be applied to the proceedings filed during the effectivity of the 2008 interim rules. Okay, so this is allowed under that law, the FRIA, and it is clear in the FRIA that the rules implementing the FRIA is made applicable to pending cases unless its application will work in justice or it would no longer be feasible. So the SE rules promulgated to implement the FRIA affirms the nature of the proceedings in the FRIA as being in rem. So jurisdiction over persons affected by the proceeding is acquired upon publication of the commencement order and the stay order. The courts can decide the petition based on affidavits, counter affidavits, and other documentary evidence without going through trial. So it is summary. And the court can conduct hearings, but only clarificatory hearings and when it is necessary. So any order issued by the court is considered as executory. So the key parties to rehabilitation proceedings and other proceedings under the FRIA are the debtor, creditor, rehabilitation receiver, excuse me. So you also need to know the definition of debtor. So debtors include sole proprietorships, partnerships, corporations, and an individual. GOCCs and non-banking government financial institutions can also be debtors unless it is prohibited by their charter. So debtors can also be groups of debtors. The difference between an individual debtor and group of debtors is that a group can only refer to corporations, partnerships, and single proprietorships, while individual debtors are natural persons who are residents and citizens of the Philippines who have become insolvent. So the FRIA excludes from its definition of debtor banks, insurance companies, pre-need companies, and national and local government agencies or units. So these kinds of juridical entities are governed by a special law, and they have their own proceedings for rehabilitation and liquidation, while national and local government agencies and units are not covered by the FRIA because the government is always liquid. Except that government financial institutions other than banks and GOCCs can be covered by the FRIA unless prohibited by their respective charters. So the FLSP rules also have suppletory application to entities who are expressly excluded from the coverage of the FRIA. So if applicable, there can be suppletory application. A creditor under the FRIA or natural and juridical persons which have claims or a claim against a debtor that arose on or before the commencement date. The commencement date refers to the date that the rehabilitation court will issue what we call a commencement order, meaning that the proceedings are set in motion by the order of the court. So the commencement date produces several legal effects that you will come to know later. So creditors in the FRIA can either be secured creditors or unsecured creditors. So secured creditors are those who have securities that are attached to their debts as opposed to unsecured creditors. So there is a hierarchy, okay, of creditors, and these are recognized in the principle of waterfall payment structures, wherein there are higher tiered creditors or those with superior claims. So waterfall payment structures will allow these higher tiered creditors to be paid of the principal and interest ahead of lower tiered creditors. While the principle of pari in passu, this means equal footing. So there are certain situations wherein a particular asset, okay, are to be considered as pari in passu, meaning all creditors are considered to have equal footing, even though they have opposing claims over a particular asset. Okay, the FRIA, on the other hand, recognizes the application of the Civil Code rule on concurrence and preference of credit, but this will be applicable when the time for liquidation comes. During rehabilitation, there is yet no adjudication of claims, no settlement of debts. So the rule on concurrence and preference of credit will only be considered when rehabilitation is no longer possible. Okay, but under the FRIA, the debtor's assets are considered to be held in trust for the equal benefit of all creditors. So pari in passu ang handling of the assets of the debtor. So the principle of pari passu is discussed in Express Investments versus Bayan Telecom. So during rehabilitation, the assets are pari passu. So it is to be held for the equal benefit of all creditors. Since there is yet no distribution, the hierarchy will only come into play when it is already time for liquidation. So the FRIA defines who are these secured creditors. So they have security either in the form of real estate or personal property or chattels. So read section 60 of the FRIA with respect to the rights of these secured creditors, as well as section 18. So these secured creditors can file opposition during the rehabilitation proceedings. So they can participate if ever their security is placed at a disadvantage because of the rehabilitation proceedings, or if it is included in uh, the rehabilitation plan. So these secured creditors, when it is time already for liquidation and the court will issue a liquidation order, their rights, their security rights, will not be affected. So they can still enforce their lien or foreclose on the property that is part of the liquidation proceedings. But they are given the choice of either waiving their rights under the security and instead pursue their claim in the liquidation proceedings. So if they choose to waive their security, then they can have a vote in the appointment of the liquidator in the liquidation proceedings. So they can also oppose, okay, or challenge the registry of claims that will be approved by the court in the liquidation proceedings. So either they participate in the liquidation proceedings by waiving their security, or they choose instead to foreclose on the security. Unsecured creditors, those without any security, okay, can file an opposition to the petition for rehabilitation. They can participate in the approval or the rejection of the rehabilitation plan. But ultimately, it will be the court who will decide on whether the petition will be granted or denied. And also in liquidation proceedings, these unsecured creditors can also participate. They can challenge the registry of claims. So in section 7 of the FRIA, the rule is that each juridical entity are considered to have separate and distinct personalities. So they are separate entities such that the assets of the debtor, even if it is affiliated with other juridical entities or persons, are considered as separate from those other persons. Unless, of course, there is commingling or mixing of the assets of the debtor. So there are situations wherein the assets and properties, even though not held in the name of the debtor, will be included in the proceedings. So if there is a finding of commingling, then that's the time when the assets, the other assets not otherwise held by the debtor will be included. So there can be joinder of other parties to the rehabilitation proceedings. They are joined with the debtor because they are related to the debtor's assets and other properties. So here's a summary on who are the persons who can initiate the different proceedings governed by the FRIA. So let's take a look at court supervised rehabilitation. So in this kind of rehabilitation, it is initiated by any of the following. the owner in a sole proprietorship. If it's a partnership, majority of the partners. If it's a corporation, by a majority vote of the board of directors or trustees, representing at least 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock. If it is a non-stock corporation, then by 2/3 vote of its members. And also an individual debtor who is not otherwise registered as a sole proprietorship. Asked in the 2014 bar, okay, who can file a petition for voluntary rehabilitation? So you need to choose one. So that's why you need to know who can file the petition. Also in the 2017 bar, okay, this question will require you to remember who can initiate the filing of a court-supervised rehabilitation. So jurisdiction is acquired by virtue of compliance with the publication and notice to the creditor requirement. The venue will fall on the regional trial court, which has jurisdiction over the principal office of the debtor alleged to be insolvent. And this principal office must be the one stated in the articles of incorporation. If the persons who initiated the petition are a group of debtors, then where any of the debtors maintain their principal office. It can also be in the regional trial court of the city or municipality where the head office is located if the principal office is in Metro Manila. So there are essentially two issues to be resolved in rehabilitation proceedings. Whether or not, okay, there can be efficient and equitable distribution of the assets of the insolvent debtor to its creditors, and whether or not a fresh start can be provided to the debtor. So the basic issues in rehabilitation proceedings will concern the viability and desirability of continuing the business operations of the petitioning corporation. So here are the stages of court supervised rehabilitation, or the CSR. We have the pre-commencement stage, commencement stage, post-hearing, pre-confirmation, confirmation, and termination. So pre-commencement, this begins from the time the petition is filed up until the court issues the commencement order. So during this time, the court will determine whether or not the petition is sufficient in form and substance. If it is so, then the court will issue the commencement order, and it will schedule the initial hearing and other hearings that may be warranted under the case. So after the conduct of the initial hearing and additional hearings, during this time, the court will be appointing a receiver if needed, if necessary. And if the receiver will recommend rehabilitation, then this is also the time that the rehabilitation plan is prepared and approved and prepared by the receiver together with the creditors and the debtor. If the rehabilitation plan is approved, then it will be need to be confirmed by the court. So before confirmation, there will be a meeting of creditors. And after confirmation of the rehabilitation plan, there is the termination of the rehabilitation. If, however, during the post hearing stage, if the receiver recommends instead that liquidation is the proper course, then the petition will be dismissed or converted to liquidation. So here are the stages of the court supervised rehabilitation. So there are certain periods prescribed when the stages must begin and end. So the initial hearing of the petition must be set no later than 40 days from the filing date. Because remember that rehabilitation proceedings are summary. And the court, in fact, must approve the rehabilitation plan not more than 90 days from the time that the court gave the petition due course. So the proceedings in rehabilitation are time bound. And the court, all in all, has 1 year from the date of filing of the petition to confirm the rehabilitation plan. So the proceedings will be terminated either with the success or the failure of the rehabilitation plan. So depending on whether or not the proceedings are voluntary or involuntary, okay, the persons who can file the petition in voluntary proceedings will be the owner, majority of the partners, the majority of the board, and stockholders representing 2/3 of the outstanding capital stock or 2/3 of the members in a non-stock corporation. In involuntary proceedings, since this is initiated by the creditor must have a claim of at least 1 million pesos and it must amount to at least 25% of the subscribed capital stock or partner's contribution, whichever is higher. So not just any creditor can file a petition for rehabilitation. So that filing creditor must have a substantial claim against the debtor. So when can a group of debtors file the petition? They can file it when one or more of its members foresee the impossibility of meeting debts when they fall due, or when the financial distress would likely adversely affect the financial condition or operations of other members of the group of debtors. So when can involuntary rehabilitation be filed? When there is no genuine issue of fact or law on the claim of the petitioners and that the due and demandable payments have not been made for at least 60 days. When the debtor has failed generally to meet its liabilities as it falls due, and when at least one creditor other than the petitioner has already initiated foreclosure proceedings against the debtor. So the FRIA is a very technical law. So you need to familiarize with the formal requirements of the petition. What are the required allegations under the FRRP rules? So the petition must allege the history of the debtor, when it was formed, how it operated, okay, how it became, how it acquired liabilities, how it became insolvent, There must also be an allegation of all the pending actions or proceedings initiated by the debtor or filed against the debtor and the courts where all those cases are pending. It must allege the threats or claims or demands to enforce claims or liens against the debtor. And even at the time of filing of the petition, the debtor must already have a plan on how it will undergo rehabilitation. So the petition itself must already be indicative of the intent to rehabilitate, and not just the intent, but there must be factual basis for the intent to rehabilitate. So here are the documentary requirements under the FRRP. So if the court finds the petition sufficient in form and substance, it will issue the commencement order within 5 working days from the filing of the petition. So the court is only given 5 days, okay, to review all those documents attached to the petition. If it is deficient in form and substance, the court can order the petitioner to amend or supplement the petition or submit other documents, also within 5 days from notice of the order. Otherwise, the court can also dismiss the petition if the order to comply was not acted upon by the petitioner within the extended 5-day period. So after the court finds the petition sufficient in form and substance, it will then issue the commencement order. So here is the first order issued by the court in the rehabilitation proceedings. This is a very significant order because the petition, the rehabilitation proceedings is deemed commence not at the time of the filing of the petition, but actually upon the issuance of the commencement order. And this date of issuance of the commencement order will then be considered to be the date of filing of the petition. So mura siya mo backtrack. There is a retroactive effect to the issuance of the commencement order. So a commencement order is issued by the court once it finds the petition sufficient in form and substance. So it must contain a declaration that the debtor is under rehabilitation. It must appoint the rehabilitation receiver. It must have a directive for all creditors to file their verified notices of claim. And this order must have a statement staying all claims against the debtor. So these are the mandatory contents of the commencement order. So here are the important contents of the commencement order in accordance with the FRIA and the rules. So all contracts that are not confirmed in writing by the debtor within 90 days following the issuance of the commencement order is deemed terminated. So how long is the effectivity of the commencement order? So this is effective for the entire duration of the proceedings unless earlier lifted by the court, if the rehabilitation plan is seasonably confirmed or approved, or if the proceedings are otherwise terminated by the court. What are the effects of the commencement order? So the most important of this is that it will prohibit or otherwise serve as the legal basis to render null and void the results of any extrajudicial activity or process that will seize property, sell encumbered property, or otherwise attempt to collect or enforce a claim against the debtor after the commencement date. So this is the consequence of the stay or suspension or the stay order, the stay effect of the commencement order. If there is a violation of the commencement order by any other agency or court, then it will constitute as indirect contempt of court. So another effect of the commencement order is that there is a waiver, okay, of all taxes and fees, including penalties and interest that may be imposed by the national government or local government units. So when do you reckon the effectivity of the commencement order? So this is one of the issues raised in a decided case. Here, the petitioner filed an amended petition, but it was filed after the court had already dismissed the first petition. However, the court later on took cognizance of the amended petition. So when do you consider the effectivity of the commencement order? Was it at the time of filing of the first petition or at the time of filing of the amended petition? So the commencement order is reckoned from the filing of the petition, and it is the petition which the court found sufficient in form and substance. Therefore, the commencement order is reckoned from the filing of the amended petition, not the first petition, which was dismissed for being deficient in form and substance. So this is significant because in this case, one of the creditors uh, opposed the inclusion of a property that was its security against a debt of the debtor. So since the creditor already foreclosed on the properties and became its owner even before the issuance of the commencement order, then that creditor and the properties na belong to it under the security of the under the security that was offered by the debtor is no longer included in the proceedings. So this is the case of Land Bank of the Philippines versus Polillo Paradise Island Corporation. So in the 2017 bar, okay, you need to know what is the commencement order and what are the effects of the commencement order. 2019 bar, the same. Cannot answer this bar question without knowing the effects of the commencement order. So this commencement order, once issued by the court, it will be furnished to interested parties. So there is the notice of the commencement order, and this commencement order must also be published in a newspaper of general circulation once a week for 2 consecutive weeks. So if there is any objection or opposition to the issuance of the commencement order or to the petition itself, then they can file their comments or opposition no later than 15 days before the date of the initial hearing set in the commencement order. So how do you send out or give notice in rehabilitation proceedings? If voluntary, the petition must be served by personal service within 5 days from the issuance of the commencement order. So this must be served to each creditor holding at least 10% of the total liabilities of the debtor. It must be also served by personal service to the BIR and to other appropriate or relevant regulatory agencies. If the proceedings are involuntary, then there must be service by personal delivery to the debtor. So not all creditors in voluntary proceedings will be served by personal service. It will suffice that there is publication of the commencement order in the petition. So only those who have a claim holding amounting to at least 10% of the total liabilities of the debtor will be served by personal service. How about foreign creditors? They must also be given notice of the proceedings. So the petitioner must serve a copy of the petition to foreign creditors 15 days before the initial hearing. So the petitioner will need to allege all the outstanding claims against it in its petition. And the this list of claims are included in the notice of claims. So it is a schedule of debts and liabilities. And if you are a creditor not included in that schedule, then they must file a verified notice of claims with the court 5 days before the initial hearing. So what if the creditor fails to file the verified notice of claim within the given period? Then the creditor, okay, will be barred from participating in the rehabilitation proceedings. But this is without prejudice to their right to still receive any distribution of the assets of the corporation if recommended and approved by the rehabilitation receiver and approved by the court. So suppliers of the debtor are prohibited from withholding supply of goods and services in the ordinary course of business for as long as the debtor is able to make payments after the issuance of the commencement order. So the debtor is not relieved from the duty to pay for those supplies despite the issuance of the commencement order. So administrative expenses, will have to be paid pursuant to the commencement order. And these are expenses incurred for the filing of the petition, including professional fees, like those of a lawyer, expenses from the rehabilitation proceedings, expenses incurred in the ordinary course of business after the commencement date, and there must also be payment of any new obligations that arise after the commencement date. But these expenses must be those related to financing the rehabilitation plan. So this includes fees for the rehabilitation receiver, the management committee, if constituted, and other professionals that need to be engaged in the implementation of the rehabilitation. So this initial hearing, this is scheduled no later than 40 days from the date of filing of the petition. So the date of this initial hearing is published along with the commencement order. So what are the matters taken up during the initial hearing? Just read this. It is in the rules. So at this hearing, creditors can appear to oppose the proceedings, but only those who were able to file a verified notice of claim. So during this hearing, the court will hear any objections to the petition and objections as well to the appointment of the receiver. So they can also hear comments filed by creditors regarding the rehabilitation plan. So at this hearing, the court will direct the rehabilitation receiver to evaluate the financial condition of the petitioner and submit the report within 40 days from the date of the initial hearing. So the court will also hear the reasonableness of the fees imposed by the receiver, for example. So the purposes of the hearing overall is to determine whether there is substantial likelihood for the petitioner, the debtor, to be rehabilitated. So just read the rules and the FRIA. So this is the second order issued by the court, and this is issued in conjunction with the commencement order. So this is the stay or suspension order, and the effect of this is that it suspends all actions or proceedings, whether in court or otherwise, that will seek the enforcement of claims against the debtor. So it's very broad as long as you are trying to enforce monetary claim or a claim capable of pecuniary estimation against the debtor, then that is stayed or suspended by the issuance of the stay or suspension order. So the commencement order and the stay or suspension order goes hand in hand. Okay? Memorize the effects of the suspension order. So the stay or suspension order is directed to all those trying to enforce a claim against the debtor, and also it includes a prohibition addressed to the debtor that prohibits the debtor from making any payment of its liabilities outstanding as of the commencement date, except as authorized by the court. It also prohibits the debtor from alienating or encumbering its assets, except if it is in the ordinary course of business. Okay, but there are exceptions to the stay or suspension order. If the case is already pending appeal in the Supreme Court as of the commencement date, and if the case is pending before a specialized court or quasi-judicial agency which has primary jurisdiction over it and is able to resolve the claim more quickly, fairly, and efficiently than the court, then it can be accepted from the stay or suspension order. But this must be upon motion of the interested party. So also not included are enforcement of claims against sureties and other persons solidarily liable with the debtor and third party or accommodation mortgagors, as well as issuers of letters of credit. Excuse me. So who are these sureties and other persons solidarily liable with the debtor, and what's the rationale why they are not included in the stay or suspension order? So that was one of the issues resolved by the Supreme Court in one case, which we will discuss later. So also excluded from the stay or suspension order are claim monies and securities that are already entrusted to a securities market participant. Any action of a licensed broker or dealer to sell, pledge securities of a debtor pursuant to a securities pledge or margin agreement. The clearing and settlement of financial transactions through clearing houses or agencies, and any criminal action against the individual debtor, owner, partner, or director or officer of a corporation. So what's the significance if they are excluded or they are exceptions to the stay or suspension order? So that means that proceedings will continue with respect to these exceptions. They are not affected by the stay or suspension order. So in the 2017 bar, you will need to assess whether or not the claim or the proceeding is subject to the stay or suspension order. Also in the 2018 bar, you can only answer this question if you know whether or not uh, this falls within the exception of the stay or suspension order. So no other choice but to memorize. Also asked in the 2014 bar. So are deficiency taxes suspended or stayed by the stay or suspension order? So yes, okay. Such that if a notice of informal conference and a formal letter of demand or FLD is sent to the debtor by the BIR, then it should be included in the stay or suspension order because it is an enforcement of a claim against the debtor, and it is included in the suspension pursuant to the commencement order. So what about creditors who how about creditors, do they have any remedies available to them to preserve their claim while the suspension order is in effect? So the issuance of the stay order will not affect the rights of creditors to commence actions. Okay, but in order to preserve, okay, their claim against the debtor and to toll the running of the prescriptive period to file a claim, then they can file an action ad cautelam to preserve their claims against the debtor. So they can file either 100,000 or 1/10 of the prescribed filing fee. Okay, just to preserve their cause of action. And once the stay order or suspension order is no longer in effect, then they can pay the balance of the filing fees upon revival of that case. So here, uh, cause of action, okay, will need to be filed within 10 years if it is based on contract, correct? So in order to preserve the right to file an action, creditors have the option of filing that action to enforce their claim, but it will still be suspended, okay, upon filing. And they only need to pay a portion of the filing fees. If the action will later be revived or reinstated, then that's the time that they will pay the balance of the filing fees. So question that had to be resolved in one case by the Supreme Court. Can the rehabilitation court reverse or invalidate acts that are inconsistent with its stay order if it is made after issuance of the commencement order but before its publication? Because sometimes, or most of the time, this will not coincide. You issue the commencement date, but it could get published like a week later or a couple of days after the commencement date. So the answer to the question is yes. And this is decided in the case of Allied Banking Corporation versus in the matter of the petition to have Steel Corporation placed under corporate rehabilitation. So the publication requirement, okay, is only a means to satisfy the requirements of due process so that they will be notified on that particular date that rehabilitation proceedings are already commenced with the proper court. But the effectivity of the stay order, which is included in the commencement order, takes effect at the time that the commencement order is issued, notwithstanding that it is not yet published. So remember the objective of rehabilitation proceeding. Its purpose is to immediately stay or suspend all claims against the debtor in order to facilitate the rehabilitation of that insolvent debtor. Okay, does the stay order apply to third party or accommodation mortgagors? So you already know this from the slide showing to you the exceptions to the stay or suspension order. But still, this was one of the issue resolved by the court. So in this particular case, the stay order was applied to a third party accommodation mortgagor. It did not suspend the foreclosure of mortgage constituted over the property of a third person mortgagor. Why? Right? How did that happen? So when the stay order was issued, the rules in effect were still the interim rules. And under those interim rules, the stay order only applied to that which was mentioned in the rules. And it is not included in the rules that the foreclosure proceedings would be suspended if it is against the property of third party mortgagors. So before the FRIA, third party accommodation mortgagors were not included in the stay order. Is prior hearing required before issuance of the stay order? So no prior hearing is required. The mandatory hearing that must be called by the court is the initial hearing, and this takes place after issuance of the commencement order, which includes the stay or suspension order. How about criminal proceedings filed against officers of a corporation who will later on file a petition for rehabilitation, and which petition was later found sufficient in form and substance, and for which the court issued a stay order? Will that have the effect of suspending as well the criminal case, since the accused is a respondent of a corporation undergoing rehabilitation? So the answer is no. Okay. This is the issue resolved in the case of Pandilio versus Regional Trial Court. How about proceedings involving a maritime lien pending before an admiralty court? Will the stay order suspend those proceedings? So the answer is yes. The maritime lien is in effect a claim against the debtor. How about when a corporation undergoing rehabilitation is directed by a court to return a particular thing which is subject of a replevin case? So here, the court ordered a corporation to return a vehicle because the corporation, who is a debtor in rehabilitation proceedings, failed to prosecute its case for replevin. So the court here ruled that the corporation, even though it is a debtor in rehabilitation proceedings, they will have to comply with the order to return the subject vehicle, because the claim of the defendant or respondent in the replevin case is not considered as enforcement of a claim within the scope of the rehabilitation proceedings. So this is the case of Advent Capital and Finance Corporation versus Young. So another controversy. Will the suspension also apply to judgments that are already in the executory stage at the time of issuance of the stay or suspension order? So the answer is yes. This is a judgment which is an enforcement of a pecuniary claim against the debtor in the rehabilitation proceedings. So the suspension order will apply to this particular case. This is the ruling in Molina versus Pacific Plans. How about an executory decision in an action for rescission filed before the HLURB? Is this also suspended by the proceedings in the rehabilitation court who has already issued a stay or suspension order? So yes, remember that an action for rescission, if there is a judgment granted in favor of rescission, will require the parties to restitute each other. They need to return whatever they have received from the contract. And that could entail the payment of money. And that falls within the claim governed by the uh, rehabilitation proceedings. So it will be subject to the stay or suspension order. This is the ruling in the case of spouses sobre one night versus ASB Development Corporation. How about a stay order? And the proceedings involve a guarantor of the debtor who waived the benefit of excussion. So are you familiar with excussion in the contract of guarantee? If you're not, you need to read about it. Or you can just read the case of Trade and Investment Development Corporation, TIDCorp versus Philippine Veterans Bank. So the rehabilitation court can only enforce claims against the debtor, its guarantors, and sureties who are not take note, not who are not solidarily liable with the debtor. If the guarantor, however, has waived the benefit of excussion, then that means that its undertaking is now as a surety who is solidarily liable with the debtor. If that's the case, then the guarantor here is principally liable already because of the waiver of the benefit of excussion, such that any enforcement against this kind of guarantor who waived the benefit of excussion will in effect be an enforcement of a claim that will affect the assets of the debtor or any other asset that is included in the rehabilitation proceedings. So if the guarantor here waived the benefit of excussion, then this guarantor, okay, is in fact no longer standing in the same footing as the debtor. So if a claim is made against this guarantor by another creditor, then the debtor will not be affected. So the stay or order will then not include this particular kind of guarantor. So read the case of TIDCorp versus Philippine Veterans Bank. So the creditor here of TIDCorp can in fact make a claim directly against TIDCorp with the debtor in the rehabilitation proceedings no longer liable to this creditor of the guarantor who waived the benefit of excussion. So there's no danger on the part of the debtor corporation undergoing rehabilitation. Okay, so this will be the first part of our discussion on the FRIA. I will either upload another video or we will continue our discussion in class in school. So this will be the end of the video. I hope you will read the assigned cases and other materials in the syllabus.